The following are the words of Lou Civello, president of the Suffolk County Police Benevolent Association.
Police officers risk their lives to protect our communities and keep our streets safe. These officers are the thin blue line that stands between your family and the criminals that would do them harm. We are your neighbors, protecting your neighborhood. Hold the line. Support law enforcement. Stand with the Suffolk County PBA.
As we do all this entire show, we're going to be playing some Christmas music as we go in and out to get us all in the spirit. And in this segment, we have with us the president of the Suffolk County PBA, good friend of the show. He's been on the show he comes on the show every other week. We talk about a lot of different things. Many of you write in with some comments, pretty much, as we all know, very supportive of our police department, the great things that we do. And Lou Civello does, again, bringing out what is important about policing in Suffolk County and so on, and representing the men and women of our police department so that we could all get good safety and the safety that we have right now. So welcome to the show, Lou Civello. It's really the last time in 2025 you'll be on.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, it's great to be here. Wonderful to be here with your audience on this holiday week.
People got the spirit and so on. But I'm going to tell you, Lou Civello, I read that Newsday thing that came out last week, and I go, my God, what is, we don't get it. We, meaning as a society, if you have the media that's supposed to bring out information, and all it does is it's almost like a perversion of what really is, and does no benefit to society when you have a major newspaper, and I don't usually focus in on Newsday, but I wanted this time because when I read that article, I said they're not there. They're not there with it. They're wrong. Absolutely wrong, and it does nothing but it creates an incendiary device for those people that go along with that nonsense about our great police departments all across this country. And of course, the article had to do with the fact that Suffolk County is still, prosecuting, or not even that, but dealing with people of color, minorities, more than they deal with people of whatever, non-color. It's just a false premise. Now, then all of a sudden, this article comes out that you wrote that I said, this is great, because when Lou comes on, I want to talk about this, because I think this is a big problem that we have. The narrative of this goes back, obviously, to the George Floyd situation. And so many police departments were, they didn't know what to do. They were trying to conform with what the politicians were saying, but at the same time, it caused more havoc than anything else. And so when I saw our local paper did this, and I said, I can't believe that they are doing this. It makes anybody loosely associated with law enforcement sick to their stomach. And then you wrote out a rebuttal that I'd have to say was one of the best that I've seen. And I want to talk about it. Go ahead, Lou Civello. What say you?
Thank you, Tom. And, it goes beyond them just being wrong. It really is dishonest at this point, because we've been here before. We've done this before. We lived through the George Floyd madness, where they tried to paint law enforcement as villains, and they take these statistics, they take them in a vacuum, and they punch them out there. I mean, what a reckless statement by Newsday, right? The statement in there that really stood out was that if you're a person of color, you're 11 times more likely to encounter force from the police department than you are if you are a white person. And that's just outright false, Tom. And the way they get that statistic is by manipulating the numbers, plain and simple. What they do is they take the percentage of a given group, their percentage of the population, and then they say force is used on you, X amount of time, and that's, more than these other groups, and therefore you're more likely to encounter it. Now, you cannot do the statistics like that. And they know this, right? They are clearly manipulating the numbers, because you're leaving out so many other factors that it's going to skew the numbers. You're leaving out how often particular people commit crimes. You're leaving out the relative instances of how often they are being violent with the police, how often they're carrying weapons, how often it is and how likely it is that they're going to comply with a lawful order. When you take all of that and you remove it from the equation, well, you can come out with a false statistic like Newsday did. And I made this point to Newsday. You could take any given group and skew it. So the point I made in my rebuttal, males, right? How often do you think we use force against males as opposed to females? It's completely skewed, where we're going to use force much more against males than females. And that's evident in the incarceration rate, Tom. The incarceration rate, people in prison in this country, it's 93% male, right? Meanwhile, males are only about 50% of the population. So if you take that statistic in a vacuum, you would think we were discriminating against males, that there was mass prejudice against the male gender, right? Doesn't make any sense. And it would be widely written about, right, if this were any other demographic, but it's not. It's barely paid attention to because it debunks this nonsense. The fact is, when you've shown that force is being used more on black people, force is being used more on Hispanic people, whoever, yeah, you've shown a correlation there. What you haven't done is shown causation. But Newsday constantly implicates causation. They constantly want to make it as if this is being done because of racial bias. Meanwhile, again, you can have a group of blood gang members, right, that attack a police officer, and we use force against all of them. All of that gets dumped into the statistics, right? You're not controlling for any of those other factors the use of force, even the example that they give. So they give an example in Newsday, Tom. And I know I'm going on a bit, but this is so frustrating for me.
Look, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you.
And you know this, Tom. This is what, it exasperates violence against police officers when you start painting us as this racist group out there targeting people of color. And that's exactly what Newsday did in that article. And I have officers this year, I had an officer shot. I had Brendan Gallagher run off the road. I've almost lost some of my brothers and sisters on this job several times this year. So I'm just so disgusted by this over and over again. And like I said, the outright dishonesty. In the Newsday article, they give the example of Asian people. And they say that we're, forced, and it's glossed over. It's basically a footnote in the article. It says that we use force less on people of Asian descent than white people. So I said to myself, well, wait a minute. So if we're comparing, that would mean that I'm discriminating against white people as opposed to their peers in the Asian population. Right. So is there some sort of racial hierarchy now where there's some discrimination against white people as opposed to Asian? Why are we using force less? This is according to Newsday. Right? Why are we using if you take Newsday's paradigm and attribute this all to racial bias, you would have to come out with the conclusion that we are somehow, as compared to the racial demographic of Asian people, that we're somehow discriminating against white people just by the rates of force. It's nonsense, Tom. It's ridiculous. Again, we have to look at socioeconomic factors. We have to look at upbringing. We have to look at culture. We have to look at what's being taught in the schools. We have to look at how likely you are to comply with the police. They give an example of a young man on a motorcycle who was asked for their ID by a police officer and just refuses to give it. Now, I know it's your constitutional right in certain cases if you haven't done anything wrong not to give your ID. I get that. But the reality is most people, when asked for their ID, right, they hand it out here, officer, of course, right? So if you want a true statistic, if you want to look at the true use of force and why, you would have to take people of all racial demographics, take a subset of those who refuse to give their ID, and then look at the force being used, right? That's how statistics are done, and Newsday knows this. But there is this total false narrative where they take that statistic in a vacuum and they say, hey, look at the racist police.
Yeah. When I read that article, of course, that's their underlying motivation is to see. You see that we've got these cops and they're out there targeting, or they're out there. And again, look, I'm saying this to the folks listening right now. Lou gave us a passionate approach to this, and it is exactly the way it is. And people, and I know most common sense people that possess a pragmatic view know this, but there are people out there that don't. And these are the people that will go further with taking that. And I like your phrase, false narrative, because it is. You mentioned culture, upbringing, school atmosphere, poverty levels, other socioeconomic factors. You mentioned that. I had an opportunity many years ago, Lou, to deal just with that question, that people of color tend to come before the criminal justice system in greater numbers than their population exists. All right. I started with that premise. It was for a master's thesis that I was working on. Okay. So what did I do, Lou? I went to the local jail and I took a demographic. Okay, what do we have here? We have people of color. We have some white males, and you're so much right. 91% of the people in jail are male. Okay, so then what I did was I interviewed. Let's say I think I chose 25 randomly. Okay, the majority of them were people of color, and I found one common thread, Lou. One common thread, and I wish Newsday would have done this on their article. All of them lacked a father figure when they were growing up. Not a mother figure, a father figure. And that they said that had they had that, they might not have done what they did, whether it was, crime against property, crimes against person, drug addiction, and all of that. And that was my narrative as far as that's concerned, that unless you have a strong family structure, you're going to be more prone to committing crimes. Not everybody, but on a higher percentage rate. Do you think that sort of gives somewhat of an answer as to if you look at the jail populations or you look at some of the things that you wrote in your article?
Yeah, so certainly, Tom. I mean, there are factors that transcend race, right? And you pointed out the major one, whether you have both parents in the house, whether you come from a loving home and have an upbringing that's going to lead you on a path to doing the right thing, obeying the law. Others are your poverty level, right? If you again, take that demographic, take it across all the various races, and then look at how likely we are to use force, or how likely that person is to succeed, how likely that person is to go to prison, you're going to see a correlation there between poverty level and whether or not you go to prison, period. But they remove all your education level, another one. They remove all of those factors and they boil it down to race because they know people don't have the time to dig into the statistics, and they just want you to believe that the police are out there being racist. It's an outright lie, and it's disgusting.
All right. And that needs to be said. And I'm glad we're getting this opportunity on this media outlet to give a different and a more, of course, you and I will both say a more correct and valid point of view on this. It's just the damage this does, I think, to an unsuspecting population out there that looks at that, reads it as it's written, and just has a negative point of view about policing in Suffolk County, because it was directed towards the Suffolk County Police Department. And I think go ahead, John.
Yeah, and Tom, and you look at what happens when you have these sorts of lies spread by the media, is then you have the electeds react, right? And we have civilian review boards where you have a bunch of untrained people who know very little about law enforcement, second-guessing everything police officers do. You have that, like in the city, where we had to stop and frisk, right? We couldn't do that anymore because that was racist. And then now you have people being pushed in front of trains, set on fire, stabbed. Right? That is, you reap what you sow, and that's the ultimate outcome if you do not rebut these lies and these false narratives. And that's why it's so important, Tom, to have this platform that you give us. And we're very thankful to you and your show to let us come on, because I spent a lot of time on the phone with Newsday, and they included a quote from me. But again, the entire article was false in its premise. And you can't do that in a quote. You can't rebut these things in a quote. You need a format like yours that you can get these points out there and show what they're doing. Pull back the curtain and show this is how you're being lied to. This is how the media is manipulating you. And really get the points out there that show how false this is.
When I was reading your article, I said you were hitting it right. You were hitting a grand slam home run. School atmosphere, poverty levels, all of that is important. All of that has nothing to do with race or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that other than the fact of living in a situation, again, going back to the single parent household where mom is taking care of 2 or 3 kids and there is no father figure. And that means there's no real income coming in because mom is trying to split between working a part-time job and so on. Kids are out on the street. That has nothing to do with race. That has to do with the socioeconomic strata, that what you're talking about. And I think that's what we need to talk about. And that's how we need to focus in on this problem. Again.
And there are correlations. There are correlations there. So there are correlations to your race, right? and to your poverty level, correlations to your race and the level of education that you're going to achieve, or that your likelihood, right? Because these are all improbabilities. But your race is not the cause of that. So, yeah, do we need to take a harder look at the correlations in policing, correlations to race in education? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do more for people of all races in terms of lifting people up? Yes, we do. But what you shouldn't do is demonize the police and say that this is happening, this use of force is happening because of race. And here, here's another point to the article, Tom, and the race one was so galling that the other one gets overlooked. The other thing that Newsday put in the article and also spoke to me about was the fact that force has increased. So they take this statistic and they say, hey, 2021 is when we put in effect this police reform, right? Andrew Cuomo, probably the worst governor we've ever had, put the police reform in effect, and it was supposed to bring down the amount of force that police officers use. We got together in Suffolk County, we worked collaboratively, and they said, but since 2021, force used by police officers has actually gone up. So you've been using more force. So it's obviously a failure, and this police reform has actually made it worse. And I said, oh, really? Well, 2021 is the same time that we passed bail reform, right? And you're telling me that you're shocked as you let these violent criminals out over and over and over again, that police had to use more force? Right? Silence on the phone, Tom. Silence. Right?
Well,
that completely left out of the equation, completely left out of the article. Right? Where's the correlation between bail reform and the amount of force that we're using?
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. I can't imagine they didn't print that, did they?
No, they did not.
Yeah,
they did not. And I did not address that in my article, but I should have, Tom, because it just shows how they're just looking to grab headlines.
Yeah. This whole thing has, to me, one of the worst phrases that were out there during the whole George Floyd thing was systematic racism, starting with the president of the United States using that. Biden was saying, yes, I believe there's systematic racism in policing. And that became, when the president says something like that, and you and I can both clearly see how wrong that is, and how our police officers, and this, the last thing any cop in the street wants is any sort of stigma of being attached to enforcing the law and doing their job with a racist tint. It's the last thing, and do everything they could to make sure that isn't happening, but at the same time enforcing the law. But the question of systematic racism, I think we should all pay attention to that, to make sure that I know we're using the phrase false narrative quite a bit. That's the false narrative quite a bit. And I think Newsday, that was part of when they authored this whole thing. That's part of what they wanted to continue on with the dialogue.
It does come, and they weaponize language, right? They come out with these terms that are complete nonsense, and it's to make you believe that there's this widespread racism that's built into the system. And again, I have 26 years of lived experience here in the Suffolk County PD, and I know that to be a lie from my own lived experience. So that when you look at that, and I know it's a lie going in, you're like, hey, what's going on here? And the reality is that they're weaponizing these terms the same way they weaponize implicit bias, right? But that's one of their catchphrases, implicit bias. That means you're racist even if you don't know it, right? You might not think you're racist. You might be actively trying, to do everything right, but you're racist anyway because it's in your system, it's in your blood, right? It's in everything that you do and everything that you say. It's in everything that you think. How do you even rebut that, Tom? Right? How do you? It's built in, and if you rebut it, well, now you're having a microaggression, right? You're angry about it, and that just shows that you're biased. So it's nonsense. It's gaslighting. It is used to sell their papers, fuel their narrative, get their favored people elected, and it's all lies, and it makes us all less safe, and it does damage to our communities.
I have about a minute left. Do you think we're going to turn the corner on this? Because I was very upset when I read that article. I thought maybe we moved in a better direction. Lou?
Yeah, I think so. And I can tell you, we put that rebuttal out on our social media. We have an overwhelming positive response, and most of the comments, were echo the sense that people are sick and tired of Newsday. They're sick and tired of the lies. They're sick and tired of them being manipulated. So I think we are turning a corner, Tom. And again, platforms like your show do a tremendous job getting our message out there. So thank you.
And the work of the Suffolk County PBA, once again, Lou Civello, President Lou. Merry Christmas to you, your membership, everybody associated with the PBA and your family and so on. And we'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks in a brand new year.
Thank you, Tom. Merry Christmas to you and your audience. Have a Merry Christmas and a safe New Year.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we get back, we've got the District Attorney, Ray Tierney, coming up next, folks. We'll be right back.
Hang up my stocking at Christmas, open my presents and I'd be glad. But the last time I played Father Christmas, I stood outside a department store. A gang of kids came over and mugged me and knocked my reindeer to the floor. He said,